We are fighting a war against Russia and not against each other.
That was Germany's Foreign Minister, Annalena Baerbock, speaking at the Council of Europe earlier this week. They were having a discussion about sending German Leopard tanks to Ukraine to fight Russians. The current international situation was also addressed by John Kirby, the Biden administration's National Security Council spokesperson, on Wednesday.
Make no mistake, the security environment in Europe has changed. Not is changing, not will change. It has changed.
What Kirby didn't mention is that the changes have primarily been consequent to escalation by the U.S. in the theater of war around Ukraine. There are now some 100,000 U.S. troops stationed near the battlefield at the borders of Poland, Romania, and the Baltic states with Ukraine and Russia. Washington also announced it'll be sending at least 31 Abrams tanks to supplement the fleet of tanks that are going to be sent by Germany. The German Leopard tanks evoke in Russia memories of the Tiger tanks that were used in Operation Barbarosa in 1941 through 1944 for the German invasion during World War II. To get a little more insight into the view from Russia, we spoke with journalist Dmitry Babich. He's with RIA Novosti, the Russian news agency based in Moscow, from Moscow via Skype on Thursday.
Of course, in Russia it is perceived very negatively, but if we follow the pattern here, we can see some reasons for optimism. I think that basically, it becomes clear that this is not a war between Russia and Ukraine. This is a war between Russia and NATO, or more generally, Russia and the West, because Finland, which is not yet a part of NATO, already offered to train Ukrainian soldiers to use the German Leopard tanks. So, in fact, when the Western media is saying, oh, Putin has provoked Finland into becoming a NATO member, Finland was so friendly towards Russia until last year. No, Finland has been de facto a NATO member since 2014, since the legally elected president in Ukraine was ousted with the help of with some help from Victoria Nuland, and after the rebellion started in the east of the country, which the Ukrainian government tried to quell using tanks and planes, and then the civil war started. And Russia took Crimea, which was saved from that civil war simply because there had already been legally Russian troops there, according to the agreement signed back in the 90s, servicing the Russian Black Sea Fleet. And Crimea is also, it's almost an island. It's a peninsula, but it's almost an island. It is connected to the rest or to the continent only by a very thin bottleneck of land, which it is easy to control. So basically, it is a war between Russia and NATO, and it is clear now. The big question is, was Putin right to counterattack in February last year in the way he did? Obviously, it also became clear this week, even from the enemy sources, we get this information that, of course, Putin did not plan a huge war. Alexei Arestovich, the former media spin doctor of President Zelensky, Alexei Arestovich revealed last week, basically, that in the first 5 days, Russia was not doing any violent actions. It was kind of trying to fight a war in gloves, as Arestovich said. The idea was that probably Ukraine would not resist in the way it later did. The Ukrainian army was not expected by Russia to be so strong, but also France and Germany were not informed. It was basically written in the Le Figaro daily last week that France and Germany were not informed by the United States, by the UK, and by Poland that actually they had trained, the Americans and the British have trained the Ukrainian army during these 8 years. There were tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers who had become professionals in the hands of American and British instructors. So it's a big question whether it was worth it, whether it was right for Putin to counterattack in the way he did. But certainly, it's a huge simplification to say that this was what the German press calls ein Angriffskrieg, a war of attack on the Russian side.
Well, they have that in their language, apparently, based on their own history. But there was also, wasn't there, on the ground in Russia, questions about him attacking in February or getting engaged in that kind of battle in February, as opposed to 8 years ago when the Civil War began and the western part of the country, the coup government, started bombing the hell out of the people in the east.
Well, the Russians, of course, the President Putin decided to intervene in February. If you remember, there were several weeks of tensions before that, and there was Zelensky's provocative speech in Munich where he regretted not having nuclear weapons. But basically, of course, as it becomes clear now, if Ukrainian army had attacked then in February or a year earlier, it already had such huge superiority over the militia in Donetsk that they would have easily overrun that militia, unlike in 2014 when Ukrainian army was still in a very sorry state. Well, but this is basically the rule. If you look at all post-Soviet states, the first wave of wars happened around 1991, before the collapse of the Soviet Union or immediately after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And then in several former Soviet republics, small separatist entities appeared. They managed to defend themselves simply by chance. There were groups of people who had weapons, who got organized. But then these separatist entities were not recognized internationally, so they could only get their weapons from France. They were not legally entities, while the former Soviet republics became legally recognized independent states, and they got their armies and they got their weapons from the West. So the Georgian army, of course, is now by far stronger than the Abkhazian militia, which won the war with Georgia in 1994, 1993. But in Ukraine, it was the same situation. Okay, in 2014, people in Donetsk and Lugansk, they got organized. Of course, they've got some weapons from Russia. That is not a huge secret. But in the 8 years that followed, Ukraine spent a huge part of its budget on weapons and on training, and it got a lot of these weapons for free from Trump. When Trump did not deliver for 1 month the weapons, he was almost impeached. You remember that the reason for impeachment was his refusal to give weapons to the corrupt government of Zelensky unofficially for just 1 month. So basically, it became clear that this is a war between Russia and NATO. And now you may ask me, what do we feel about it, and do we have any hope of winning? Well, I hope we will win, not because Ukraine does not have enough weapons, but because Zelensky is behaving irresponsibly. He's behaving as an adventurist. Basically, if you look at his pattern of behavior, whenever he gets a new weapon, he immediately starts to ask for a stronger one. He is never happy. He got Javelin anti-tank weapons. He started to ask for tanks. He got Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, a terrible weapon which could fall into the hands of terrorists easily and be very dangerous in the Middle East, everywhere. He got obviously hundreds of those. Now he wants planes. He wants fighter jets from Germany and from the United States. And this reminds me of the fairy tale about the fisherman who caught a goldfish, and the fisherman had a very, very troublesome wife, who wanted first from that goldfish to get new pottery, then she wanted to become a member of the gentry, then she wanted to become the queen, and the goldfish delivered it all, but then that old woman wanted to become a god. And then goldfish just went away. So if you look at Zelensky's behavior, first he said, we just want to stop the Russians. We just want to keep Kiev, okay? Then Russia had negotiation. We agreed to pull our troops away from Kiev. Okay, we did it. We did our part of the agreement. And then Ukraine just stopped negotiating. They never sent their negotiating team again. And suddenly it now transpires that Zelensky wants not only the Donbass, which he had been bombing, he and his predecessor Poroshenko had been bombing for 8 years. He also wants Crimea, which has become firmly a part of Russia during these years, and where people do not want to have anything in common with him, the huge majority of people. So because he makes more and more heightened demands, first, it is very dangerous for the world because Russia may be forced to use destructive weapons. And second, it will be his own undoing, because this is the art of politics. Never aspire for something that you can't get. Never lose your mind going too far. And he obviously is losing his mind going too far.
Very good. Thank you very much, Dmitry. Take care, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.